It was a quiet afternoon in the small suburban town when the piercing sound of police sirens shattered the calm. Two young black twins, Marcus and Malik, barely 17 years old, were walking home from the park, laughing and carrying their basketball. They were ordinary kids with big dreams. Marcus wanted to be an engineer, and Malik had his heart set on playing college basketball. But as the flashing lights pulled up beside them, the air around them turned cold. Officer Darren, a man known for his abrasive demeanor and heavy-handed tactics, stepped out of the squad car. His eyes narrowed as he looked at the twins, sizing them up as though they were suspects before they even said a word. Darren had a reputation around town, one that left people wary of crossing his path. His badge gave him power, and he wielded it like a weapon. For Marcus and Malik, the encounter started with confusion, but the situation quickly spiraled. "Hey, you two! Stop right there," Darren barked, his voice sharp and commanding. The twins exchanged a glance, unsure of what was happening. They complied, their hands instinctively rising slightly, not wanting to provoke anything. "What's in the bag?" Darren demanded, pointing to Marcus's backpack. "It's just our stuff from the park," Marcus replied nervously, opening the bag to reveal a water bottle, a notebook, and a pair of basketball shoes. Darren didn't even glance inside before yanking it out of Marcus's hands. "Don't lie to me," Darren snapped. "What else are you hiding?" "We're not hiding anything," Malik said, his voice steady but tinged with fear. The twins weren't strangers to these encounters. They had been taught from a young age how to handle themselves around police, but no amount of preparation could make the reality less terrifying. The officer grabbed Marcus by the arm, twisting it behind his back. "You're under arrest," Darren said coldly. "For what?" Marcus cried, panic flooding his voice. Malik stepped forward instinctively to protect his brother, but Darren was quick to pull out his taser, aiming it at the younger twin. "Back off, or you're next," Darren threatened. The scene escalated quickly. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, some recording on their phones, but no one dared to intervene. The twins pleaded, insisting they had done nothing wrong, but Darren was unmoved. He radioed for backup, acting as if he had just apprehended dangerous criminals. It was then that something strange happened. Marcus managed to look Darren in the eye and said, "You don't know what you're doing. This isn't going to end the way you think." His voice, calm but resolute, seemed to unnerve Darren for just a moment. The officer's hand trembled slightly on the taser. 10 minutes later, everything changed. Darren, who had been so confident and aggressive, now found himself in a position he never anticipated. Desperation etched across his face as he realized he might have made the biggest mistake of his life. The power he held moments ago seemed to vanish, and the twins stood before him, not as his captives, but as the only people who could save him. What could have possibly happened in such a short time to turn the tables so dramatically? Why was this once unshakable officer now begging for mercy? Stay tuned, because this story is just getting started. You won't believe how this encounter unfolds. Darren's breathing grew heavier as the seconds ticked by. His initial confidence was gone, replaced by a flicker of fear that he tried to suppress. He glanced around, noticing the growing crowd of onlookers holding up their phones, recording every second. The situation was slipping out of his control, and he knew it. But Darren wasn't the kind of man to back down easily. He had built his career on dominance and intimidation, and that badge on his chest was his shield from consequences, or so he thought. Meanwhile, Marcus and Malik stood side by side, their hands raised, their hearts pounding like war drums. Marcus's words hung heavy in the air. "You don't know what you're doing. This isn't going to end the way you think." There was something about the way he said it, calm, steady, almost as if he knew something Darren didn't. Malik glanced at his brother, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. What did Marcus mean? And why was Darren, for the first time in the encounter, looking uncertain? The crowd around them murmured quietly. Some whispered indignantly about the officer's behavior, while others speculated about what the twins might have done to attract his attention in the first place. A few tried to inch closer, their phones held high to capture every angle, but Darren barked at them to stay back, his voice cracking slightly. That crack in his tone didn't go unnoticed. It was the sound of a man whose grip on power was slipping. "Please," Marcus said softly, his voice carrying an unusual weight. "You don't have to do this. Just let us go, and this doesn't have to get worse." Darren's jaw tightened. "Shut up. You think you can talk your way out of this? Not happening. Backup's on the way." But even as he spoke, his hand faltered on the taser. He looked at Marcus, almost as if trying to figure him out. Why wasn't this kid as terrified as he should have been? Why did it feel like Marcus was the one in control now? Malik, still standing protectively beside his brother, couldn't help but notice Darren's unease. "You're scared," he said, his voice quieter but no less cutting. "Why are you scared of us? We didn't do anything." "Quiet," Darren snapped, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. He glanced around nervously, his eyes darting from the twins to the crowd, then back to his squad car. Something about this situation was unnerving him, and it wasn't just the growing audience or the steady buzz of phones capturing every moment. There was something about Marcus and Malik, something he couldn't put his finger on, that made him feel like he was no longer in control. The tension was almost unbearable. The twins stood firm, their hands still raised, but there was a quiet strength in their posture. Darren, on the other hand, was unraveling by the second. His bravado was crumbling, and with it, the authority he had so ruthlessly wielded just minutes ago. Then, out of nowhere, the twins' mother appeared. She had been alerted by a neighbor who saw the commotion from their window and rushed to the scene, her heart racing with fear for her boys. Janice was a woman who had spent her life fighting to protect her children from the harsh realities of the world. Seeing them in this situation, hands raised, surrounded by strangers, with an officer threatening them, ignited a fire in her. "Officer," she shouted, pushing her way through the crowd. "What's going on here? These are my sons." Darren turned sharply, startled by her sudden arrival. "Stay back, ma'am. This doesn't concern you." "The hell it doesn't," Janice shot back, her voice fierce and unwavering. "Those are my boys, and I have every right to know why you're arresting them." She stepped closer, her eyes blazing with a mix of fear and anger. "What are the charges? What have they done?" Darren hesitated, stumbling over his words. They're acting suspicious, resisting." "Resisting what?" Janice interrupted, her voice rising. "Walking home from the park, carrying a backpack. You're accusing them of something they didn't do, and you know it." The crowd murmured louder now, emboldened by Janice's defiance. Darren's face flushed red, his grip on the situation slipping further. He opened his mouth to speak, but was cut off by Marcus. "Mom, it's okay," Marcus said, his voice calm and even. "He's just scared." Those words struck a nerve. Darren stiffened, his eyes narrowing at Marcus. "Watch your mouth, kid," he growled, but the edge in his voice was dulled by the doubt creeping into his expression. "Scared of what?" Janice demanded, stepping closer. "Two kids who'd done nothing wrong. Or the fact that you're caught on camera harassing them for no reason. You don't want this fight, officer. Let them go." Darren's hand hovered over his taser again, but he didn't move to use it. His eyes flicked back to Marcus, who was staring at him with an intensity that made his stomach churn. Marcus didn't look angry or afraid. He looked certain, as if he knew how this would end. "You don't get it, do you?" Marcus said quietly. "It's not about the cameras or the crowd. It's about you. You're scared of what's coming." "What are you talking about?" Darren snapped, his voice rising with frustration. "What's coming?" Before Marcus could answer, the sound of distant sirens filled the air. Backup was on its way. Darren straightened, trying to regain his composure, but the unease in his eyes remained. Janice placed a protective arm around her sons, her gaze locked on Darren. "You better hope those sirens are here to save you, officer," she said coldly. "Because you're digging yourself into a hole you won't climb out of." The sirens grew louder, the tension thicker. Darren's hand twitched by his side, his mind racing. He was the one with the badge, the authority, the power. But for the first time, it felt like none of that mattered. The twins weren't running. They weren't begging or pleading. They were standing there, calm and steady, as if they knew something he didn't. And Darren couldn't shake the feeling that they were right. The crowd grew larger as the backup sirens edged closer. People murmured among themselves, their faces a mix of concern, frustration, and anger. Some whispered about the twins' calm demeanor, others questioned Darren's intentions, and a few speculated about what the officer might have to hide. The air felt charged, as though something big was about to happen. Darren's grip on his taser tightened, though he hadn't lifted it again. He stood frozen, his eyes darting between Marcus, Malik, and Janice. He could feel the weight of the crowd's judgment pressing down on him, but there was something more unnerving, something he couldn't quite name. Marcus's words echoed in his head. Asterisk, you don't know what you're doing. This isn't going to end the way you think. Asterisk, for the first time, he wondered if they might be true. Janice, holding her sons close, refused to back down. Her fierce presence only added fuel to the fire, and Darren could see in her eyes that she wasn't going to let this go. She'd been through too much in her life, fought too hard for her family, to let some overzealous officer ruin her sons' futures over nothing. But beneath her anger was a simmering fear. She couldn't shake the thought of what might have happened if she hadn't shown up when she did. Officer, Janice said firmly, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest, you've got two choices right now. Either you let my sons go, or you explain to this crowd, asterisk and asterisk your backup, why you're holding two innocent kids without cause. Darren opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, Malik chimed in. His voice was quieter than his brother's, but no less steady. You're trying to control the situation, but you've already lost it. Everyone here can see that. It's over. Darren whipped his head toward Malik, his face flushed with anger. You don't get to tell me what's over, kid. I'm the one in charge here. But even as the words left his mouth, they felt hollow. He could see the truth in Malik's eyes, in the way the crowd shifted closer, in the murmurs that grew louder with each passing second. His authority, the thing he'd built his entire career on, was slipping away. The backup squad cars finally arrived, their lights flashing as two officers stepped out. Darren felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. One of the officers was Sergeant Reyes, a senior officer known for his no-nonsense approach to justice, and his unwillingness to tolerate misconduct, even among his own. Officer Darren, Reyes called out as he approached, his sharp eyes taking in the scene. What's going on here? Darren straightened, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. I apprehended these two suspects for suspicious activity, Sergeant. They were resisting when I... Suspicious activity. Reyes interrupted, his tone skeptical. He glanced at Marcus and Malik, then at the crowd of onlookers, many of whom were recording on their phones. What kind of suspicious activity? They were carrying a bag, Darren stammered. I thought it might contain something illegal. Reyes raised an eyebrow. Did you search the bag? Well, yes, but... And what did you find? Nothing but... Reyes held up a hand to stop him. His gaze shifted to the twins. You boys okay? Reyes held up a hand to stop him. His gaze shifted to the twins. You both. The crowd murmured louder now, their outrage growing. Reyes turned back to Darren, his expression unreadable. Is that true? Darren opened his mouth to protest, to defend himself, but the words caught in his throat. The weight of Reyes's scrutiny, the crowd's judgment, and the twins' unwavering calm pressed down on him like a heavy blanket. For the first time, he felt truly exposed. Sergeant, they were acting suspicious, Darren said weakly. I was just doing my job. Life's okay. Marcus nodded, though his posture remained guarded. We're fine. We didn't do anything wrong. He just stopped us out of nowhere. Janice stepped forward, her voice sharp. He arrested my sons for walking home from the park. That's what happened. Reyes didn't respond immediately. He turned to the twins again, his tones softer. What's in the bag? Just my basketball stuff, Marcus said, opening the bag to show him. Reyes inspected it briefly, then nodded. Nothing illegal here, Reyes said, turning back to Darren. So why are they in handcuffs? Darren's face turned beet red. I thought. You thought wrong, Reyes said bluntly. He gestured to the crowd. This whole thing is a mess, and it's on you. Get those cuffs off. For a moment, Darren hesitated. He looked at Reyes, then at the crowd, then at Marcus and Malik. The fear that had been building inside him finally boiled over. His hands trembled as he reached for the keys to unlock the cuffs, and for the first time, he felt the full weight of his actions. He wasn't just losing control, he was losing everything. As Darren fumbled with the cuffs, Marcus leaned in just slightly, his voice low enough that only Darren could hear. I told you this wasn't going to end the way you thought, but this is just the beginning. Darren's hands froze, his eyes snapping to Marcus's face. There was something in the boy's expression, something calm, knowing, and utterly unshakable. It was the look of someone who knew exactly how this story would end, even if Darren didn't. The cuffs clicked open, and Marcus and Malik stepped back, free at last. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, but the tension in the air didn't dissipate entirely. Darren stood there, frozen, his hands trembling, as Reyes turned to him. We're going to have a long talk back at the station, Reyes said coldly. But for now, I suggest you get out of here before this gets any worse. Darren nodded numbly, his face pale as he stumbled back toward his squad car. As he drove away, the weight of what had just happened settled on him like a stone. He had been so sure of his power, his authority, his control. But in the end, it was all an illusion. And deep down, he knew he hadn't just lost a confrontation, he had awakened something much bigger. Something he wasn't ready to face. Back at the scene, Janice pulled her sons into a tight embrace, her relief palpable. Are you okay? She asked, her voice trembling. We're okay, Mom, Marcus said softly, though his gaze lingered on the direction Darren had driven off. But this isn't over. Malik looked at his brother, a question in his eyes, but Marcus didn't elaborate. Whatever he meant, it was clear that this encounter had only scratched the surface of something much deeper, something that would change everything. The car ride home was tense and silent. Janice drove with one hand gripping the wheel tightly, her other hand trembling in her lap. Marcus sat in the back seat, staring out the window, his expression unreadable, while Malik kept glancing at him, trying to figure out what was going through his brother's mind. The confrontation with Darren had shaken them all, but there was something about the way Marcus had handled it, his calm, almost eerie confidence that left Malik uneasy. You're sure you're okay? Janice finally asked, her voice breaking the silence. We're fine, Mom, Marcus replied softly. His tone was steady, but it didn't offer the reassurance Janice was looking for. Malik, sitting beside him, frowned. Marcus, Malik said, his voice low, what did you mean back there? About this not being over? Marcus turned to his brother, his expression serious. I know how people like Darren think. They don't stop just because they're embarrassed. He's not going to let this go. Janice's grip on the wheel tightened. He won't have a choice. Everyone saw what happened. He can't touch you boys now. Marcus shook his head slightly. It's not about what he can do, Mom. It's about what he wants to do. And someone like him. He's not going to let it end like this. The weight of his words settled heavily in the car. Janice's chest tightened, her heart pounding as a flood of worry filled her mind. She wanted to argue, to tell Marcus that Darren had no power now, but deep down she knew her son was right. Darren's bruised ego and the public humiliation he'd just faced would only fuel him. That night, the house felt quieter than usual, as if the events of the day had drained the energy from its walls. Janice stayed in the kitchen, pretending to clean while keeping an ear out for any noises outside. Marcus and Malik were upstairs in their room, but the air between them was tense. "Do you think he'll come after us?" Malik asked, sitting on the edge of his bed. Marcus leaned against the window, staring out into the dark street. "Not right away. He's too smart for that. But yeah, I think he will. People like him, they don't take losing well." "Then what do we do?" Malik's voice wavered slightly, and for a moment, he looked like the little brother Marcus had spent his whole life protecting. Marcus turned to him, his gaze steady. "We don't let him win. That's what we do." Malik nodded slowly, but the unease in his chest didn't fade. He trusted Marcus. He always had. But something about his brother's calmness was unsettling. It was as if Marcus had already prepared for whatever was coming next, and that scared Malik more than anything. Hours passed, and the house eventually settled into silence. But outside, a figure lingered in the shadows across the street. Darren sat in his unmarked car, his face illuminated by the soft glow of his phone screen. He scrolled through social media, his jaw tightening as he watched videos of the incident from earlier. The comments were brutal. People calling him a racist, a bully, an example of everything wrong with law enforcement. His hands trembled with anger as he tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. The humiliation burned deep, all the entire time. That look had haunted him all day, and now it fueled his rage. He wasn't going to let some teenager get the better of him. Not now, not ever. Across the street, Marcus sat by the window, watching the shadows. He couldn't see Darren, but he felt his presence like a weight pressing against his chest. His instincts told him that Darren wasn't done with them. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. If Darren thought he could scare them, he had no idea who he was dealing with. The next day, things seemed to return to normal, but the unease lingered like a storm cloud. At school, Marcus and Malik were bombarded with questions from classmates who had seen the videos online. Some praised them for standing up to Darren, while others asked if they were scared. Marcus answered politely, but kept his responses short, while Malik stayed mostly quiet. But the normalcy didn't last long. By the afternoon, Janice received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was low and menacing. "Tell your boys to watch their backs," it said before the line went dead. Janice's hands shook as she hung up the phone. She immediately called the police to report the threat, but the officer who took the call sounded dismissive. "Probably just a prank," he said. "Nothing to worry about." But Janice was worried. She knew a threat when she heard one, and she had no doubt that Darren was behind it. She didn't tell Marcus and Malik about the call, not wanting to scare them, but Marcus could sense something was wrong the moment he saw her face. "What happened?" he asked that evening as they sat down for dinner. "Nothing," Janice said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just tired, that's all." Marcus didn't press her, but he didn't believe her either. That night, he stayed up late, pacing the room while Malik tried to sleep. The uneasy feeling in his chest grew stronger, and he couldn't shake the sense that something was about to happen. And he was right. The next day, as the twins walked home from school, a car pulled up beside them. It wasn't Darren's squad car, it was an unmarked black sedan. The windows were tinted, and the car idled for a moment before the passenger window rolled down. Darren's face appeared, his expression cold and calculating. "Thought I'd stop by," Darren said, his voice low, "just to see how you boys were doing." Marcus stepped in front of Malik, his posture protective. "We're fine," he said evenly. Darren smirked, leaning an arm out the window. "Good, glad to hear it. But you should know, I don't like being made a fool of, and I don't forget things like that." "You should," Marcus shot back, his voice calm but firm, "because if you don't, this won't end well for you." Darren's smirk faltered for a split second before he laughed, though the sound was hollow. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But don't push your luck, kid." The car sped off, leaving Marcus and Malik standing in its wake. Malik's hands trembled as he looked at his brother. "Marcus, What are we going to do? He's not going to stop. Marcus's jaw tightened as he stared after the car. No, he said quietly. He's not, but neither are we. The tension reached a boiling point as they walked the rest of the way home. Marcus's mind raced with possibilities, each one more dangerous than the last. Darren was coming for them, and Marcus knew they had to be ready. But the question remained, how far would Darren go? And how far would they have to go to stop him? The car ride home was tense and silent. Janice drove with one hand gripping the wheel tightly, her other hand trembling in her lap. Marcus sat in the back seat, staring out the window, his expression unreadable, while Malik kept glancing at him, trying to figure out what was going through his brother's mind. The confrontation with Darren had shaken them all, but there was something about the way Marcus had handled it, his calm, almost eerie confidence, that left Malik uneasy. "You're sure you're okay?" Janice finally asked, her voice breaking the silence. "We're fine, Mom," Marcus replied softly. His tone was steady, but it didn't offer the reassurance Janice was looking for. Malik, sitting beside him, frowned. "Marcus," Malik said, his voice low, "what did you mean back there? About this not being over?" Marcus turned to his brother, his expression serious. I know how people like Darren think. They don't stop just because they're embarrassed. He's not going to let this go." Janice's grip on the wheel tightened. "He won't have a choice. Everyone saw what happened. He can't touch you boys now." Marcus shook his head slightly. "It's not about what he can do, Mom. It's about what he wants to do. And someone like him, he's not going to let it end like this." Marcus leaned against the window, staring out into the dark street. "Not right away. He's too smart for that. But yeah, I think he will. People like him, they don't take losing well." "You're sure you're okay?" Janice finally asked, her voice breaking the silence. "We're fine, Mom," Marcus replied softly. His tone was steady, but it didn't offer the reassurance Janice was looking for. Malik, sitting beside him, frowned. "Marcus," Malik said, his voice low, "what did you mean back there? About this not being over?" Marcus turned to his brother, his expression serious. I know how people like Darren think. They don't stop just because they're embarrassed. He's not going to let this go." Janice's grip on the wheel tightened. "He won't have a choice. Everyone saw what happened. He can't touch you boys now." Marcus shook his head slightly. "It's not about what he can do, Mom. It's about what he wants to do. And someone like him, he's not going to let it end like this." "What happened?" he asked that evening as they sat down for dinner. "Nothing," Janice said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just tired, that's all." Marcus didn't press her, but he didn't believe her either. That night, he stayed up late, pacing the room while Malik tried to sleep. The uneasy feeling in his chest grew stronger, and he couldn't shake the sense that something was about to happen. And he was right. The next day, as the twins walked home from school, a car pulled up beside them. It wasn't Darren's squad car. It was an unmarked black sedan. The windows were tinted, and the car idled for a moment before the passenger window rolled down. Darren's face appeared, his expression cold and calculating. "Thought I'd stop by," Darren said, his voice low, "just to see how you boys were doing." Marcus stepped in front of Malik, his posture protective. "We're fine," he said evenly. Darren smirked, leaning an arm out the window. "Good, glad to hear it. But you should know, I don't like being made a fool of, and I don't forget things like that." "You should," Marcus shot back, his voice calm but firm. "Because if you don't, this won't end well for you." Darren's smirk faltered for a split second before he laughed, though the sound was hollow. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But don't push your luck, kid." The car sped off, leaving Marcus and Malik standing in its wake. Malik's hands trembled as he looked at his brother. "Marcus, what are we going to do? He's not going to stop." Marcus's jaw tightened as he stared after the car. No, he said quietly. He's not, but neither are we. The tension reached a boiling point as they walked the rest of the way home. Marcus's mind raced with possibilities, each one more dangerous than the last. Darren was coming for them, and Marcus knew they had to be ready. But the question remained, how far would Darren go? And how far would they have to go to stop him? The twins reached home just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the neighborhood in shadows. Janice was waiting for them on the porch, her arms crossed, her face lined with worry. She had tried to stay calm all day, but something about the way Marcus and Malik walked up the driveway, their expressions tense, told her that her worst fears were coming true. "What happened?" she asked, stepping down to meet them. Her voice was firm, but the tremor in it betrayed her fear. Marcus shook his head slightly. "Nothing we can't handle, Mom." His voice was steady, but Janice wasn't convinced. She looked to Malik for confirmation, but he avoided her gaze. "Don't give me that," she said, her tone sharper now. "Tell me what's going on. All of it." Malik hesitated, glancing at Marcus, who gave him a small nod. Finally, he relented. "Darren found us," Malik admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "He pulled up in some car while we were walking home. He didn't do anything, but he made it clear this isn't over." Janice's face went pale, and she reached for the railing to steady herself. "He threatened you. What did he say?" "Just the same thing he's been saying," Marcus said, "trying to scare us, trying to make us back down." Janice's lips tightened into a thin line. Her maternal instincts screamed at her to call someone, anyone, to stop this before it escalated. But after the dismissive response to her earlier report, she wasn't sure who she could trust. "This has gone too far," she said, her voice trembling. "We're going to the station tomorrow. We're filing an official complaint." Marcus's jaw clenched, but he nodded. He wasn't sure it would do any good, but he also knew they couldn't sit back and let Darren intimidate them. "All right," he said, "but we have to be smart about it. Darren's already desperate. If he thinks we're coming after him, he might do something reckless." Janice nodded, though her heart was heavy with dread. That night, she barely slept. The next day, as they prepared to leave for the police station, a loud knock echoed through the house. Janice froze in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she set down the coffee mug she'd been holding. Marcus and Malik exchanged a glance before Marcus moved toward the door. "Don't," Janice whispered urgently. "It could be him." Marcus paused, his hand hovering over the doorknob. "We can't just ignore it, Mom." Janice nodded reluctantly, her breath shallow as she stood behind him. Marcus opened the door cautiously, his body tense. To his surprise, it wasn't Darren on the other side, it was Sergeant Reyes. "Mrs. Carter," Reyes said, his tone serious as he stepped onto the porch. "I need to speak with you and your sons. May I come in?" Janice hesitated for a moment before nodding and stepping aside. Reyes entered, his expression grim. He motioned for them to sit in the living room, and once they were all seated, he took a deep breath. "I came here because there's something you need to know," he began. "Something I think might explain why Darren has been acting the way he has." Janice leaned forward, her heart pounding. "What is it?" Reyes hesitated, as if debating how much to reveal. Finally, he said, "Darren isn't just targeting your sons out of spite. He's involved in something much bigger, something illegal, and I believe he's trying to cover his tracks." Janice's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Reyes leaned in, lowering his voice. "There's been an internal investigation into Darren for months. He's been linked to a network of officers who've been using their positions to protect certain criminal activities, drug trafficking primarily. I think when he stopped your sons, he wasn't just profiling them. He thought they might have seen something or had information that could expose him." The room fell silent, the weight of Reyes' words sinking in. Marcus was the first to speak, his voice calm but laced with tension. "So he's trying to scare us into staying quiet." Reyes nodded. "Exactly. And if he thinks you're going to the station to file a complaint, he might escalate. That's why I came here, to warn you and to offer my help. But you need to be careful." Janice's mind raced as she tried to process what she was hearing. Why hasn't he been arrested already, if there's an investigation? "It's complicated," Reyes said, cutting her off gently. "We're still gathering evidence, and Darren knows how to cover his tracks. But trust me, we're closing in. That's why he's getting desperate." Marcus's jaw tightened. "If you're closing in, then we need to help you. He's not just going to go away." Reyes looked at him, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "That's brave of you, but it's dangerous. Darren is unpredictable, and he's got allies who are just as dangerous as he is. If you're going to do this, you need to trust me and let me guide you." Janice placed a protective hand on Marcus's arm. "We'll do whatever it takes to keep my boys safe," she said firmly. "But you need to promise me you'll take him down." Reyes nodded, his expression resolute. "I will, but we need to act fast. Darren won't wait long before making his next move." The room fell silent again as the gravity of the situation set in. Darren wasn't just a rogue cop with a bruised ego. He was part of something far more dangerous. And now, the twins and their mother were caught in the middle of it. The stakes had never been higher, and the clock was ticking. As the gravity of Sergeant Reyes's words settled over them, Janice's protective instincts surged stronger than ever. She studied Reyes's face, searching for any trace of insincerity, but all she saw was determination. Still, trusting anyone, even a seemingly well-meaning officer, felt like stepping into quicksand. "What's your plan?" Marcus asked, breaking the heavy silence. His voice was steady, but his fists were clenched in his lap, a testament to his barely contained frustration. Reyes leaned forward, his tone cautious but firm. "The first thing we need to do is make sure you're all protected. Darren isn't working alone, and if word gets out that you're cooperating with me, it could put a target on your back. That means keeping a low profile and sticking to routines as much as possible. But we also need to document everything. If Darren approaches you again, record it. Every threat, every interaction. It'll strengthen our case." Janice frowned, her heart racing. "But what about Darren? You said he's desperate. What's stopping him from?" She paused, unable to finish the sentence, her fear choking her words. Reyes held her gaze, his expression somber. "That's why I'm here. I'll be monitoring him closely, and I'll make sure there's backup nearby at all times. But Janice," his voice softened, "you need to understand that this won't be over quickly. Darren's been in this system for years. He knows how to manipulate it. That's why we have to be strategic." Janice nodded reluctantly, but her fear was palpable. Malik shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting between Reyes and Marcus. "What if he comes here again?" Malik asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if he doesn't wait?" Reyes's jaw tightened. "Then you call me immediately," he said firmly, sliding a card with his direct number across the coffee table. "No hesitation. I'll make sure someone is here before things get out of hand." Marcus picked up the card and slipped it into his pocket, his expression unreadable. "And what about us?" he asked. "We can't just sit here waiting for him to make a move." "You won't be waiting," Reyes said. "I'm going to need your help. You've already seen things that could be critical to this investigation. If Darren even thinks you have evidence against him, that's why he's so focused on you. So, if there's anything at all, you haven't told me, now's the time." Marcus and Malik exchanged a glance, and for the first time, hesitation flickered across Marcus's face. "There's something," he admitted slowly. "The day he pulled us over, he got a call on his radio. It sounded strange, like he was expecting it. He left in a hurry, but before he drove off, he told someone on the phone that it was handled. We didn't think much of it at the time, but now—" Reyes' expression darkened. "Did you catch any other details? A name, a location?" Marcus shook his head. "No, just that it was important." He seemed nervous. Reyes nodded thoughtfully, filing the information away. "That might be a lead," he said. "I'll look into it. But for now, the most important thing is staying safe. If Darren knows you're onto him, he'll escalate. But if we play this right, we can take him down for good." Janice exhaled shakily, gripping the edge of the couch. She didn't trust the system, not after everything they'd been through, but Reyes was her best shot at keeping her sons safe. "All right," she said finally. "We'll do what you ask. But if anything happens to my boys..." Her voice trailed off, but the warning was clear. Reyes nodded. "I understand," he said, his voice steady. "I won't let it come to that." As Reyes left the house, promising to stay in touch, the air felt heavier, thick with unspoken fears. Janice closed the door behind him, leaning against it as she fought back tears. "What have we gotten ourselves into?" she murmured. "We didn't get ourselves into anything," Marcus said, his voice firm. "This is on Darren, and he's not going to win." Malik nodded, but his hands trembled as he folded them in his lap. "We just have to be careful," he said. "Reyes might be trying to help, but we can't rely on him alone. We need to watch our own backs." Janice pulled her sons into a tight embrace, her heart aching with a mix of pride and fear. "We'll get through this," she whispered. "We have to." That night, the house was eerily quiet, every creak of the floorboards and rustle of the wind outside setting him on edge. Marcus stayed by the window again, his phone within reach, while Malik double-checked the locks. Janice sat at the kitchen table, staring at the card Reyes had left, her mind racing with plans and contingencies. But as the hours dragged on, a gnawing sense of unease crept over them. Darren wasn't the type to back down, and they all knew it. Somewhere out there he was watching, waiting for his moment, and when it came, they would have to be ready. The night seemed endless. Each passing second was stretched thin with tension, the quiet of the house punctuated only by the occasional hum of a car driving by or the soft creak of the old wooden floors. Marcus stayed at his post by the window, staring out into the darkness. His phone was gripped tightly in his hand, ready to dial Reyes at the first sign of trouble. Malik sat on the couch, a blanket wrapped around him, though it did little to stop the shiver running through his body. Janice stayed in the kitchen, her eyes darting between the clock on the wall and the front door, every second adding weight to her worry. When morning finally came, the pale sunlight streaming through the curtains did little to ease their tension. The house felt just as heavy, the threat of Darren's next move hanging over them like a dark cloud. But as they prepared for another day of uncertainty, an unexpected knock at the door froze them all in place. Janice's heart jumped into her throat. Marcus and Malik exchanged a glance, their instincts screaming that something wasn't right. Marcus motioned for Malik to stay back as he cautiously approached the door. "Who is it?" he called out, his voice firm but steady. "It's Reyes," came the familiar voice from the other side. Marcus hesitated for a moment before unlocking the door, pulling it open just enough to see the officer standing there, his expression grim. Behind him, another officer stood with a clipboard, and a marked police car idled at the curb. Janice stepped forward, her hands trembling. "What's happened? Did he?" "He's been taken into custody," Reyes said quickly, holding up a hand to calm her. "But there's more to this. We need to talk at the station." Janice exhaled sharply, relief mixing with apprehension. Darren being arrested was a step in the right direction, but the way Reyes spoke made it clear that things weren't as simple as they seemed. Without hesitation, they grabbed their coats and followed Reyes to his car, the drive to the station silent and tense. When they arrived, Reyes led them into a small conference room where a woman in a suit was waiting. She introduced herself as Agent Torres, someone working on the internal investigation Reyes had mentioned. As they all sat down, Torres wasted no time getting to the point. "Darren was arrested early this morning," she began, her tone calm but serious. "We caught him meeting with a known associate of a criminal organization we've been tracking. Thanks to the information your family provided, we were able to intercept him before things escalated." Marcus leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "So he's out of the picture now?" Torres exchanged a glance with Reyes before answering. "For now, yes. But Darren wasn't acting alone. He's part of a larger network, And while we've made significant progress in dismantling it, there's still work to be done. That's why it's important you remain cautious. Janice frowned, her relief dimmed by the realization that the danger wasn't entirely gone. "What about us?" she asked. "Are we still in danger?" Reyes nodded. "We're putting measures in place to ensure your safety. Darren's arrest sends a strong message, but it also means his allies might be looking for ways to protect themselves. You'll need to be vigilant." Despite the gravity of the situation, a sense of validation washed over them. Their decision to stand up to Darren, to trust Reyes and provide the information they had made a difference. Marcus glanced at his mother and brother, his expression a mix of exhaustion and quiet pride. "Does this mean we're done?" Malik asked, his voice soft but hopeful. "Or is there more we need to do?" "For now, focus on staying safe," Torres said, offering a small but reassuring smile. "You've done more than enough. The information you've provided has been invaluable, and it's helping us clean up a system that's been broken for far too long." As the meeting wrapped up, Reyes escorted them back to their car. He placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You're brave," he said. "All of you. Not many people would have stood up the way you did. If you ever need anything, you call me. Anytime." The drive home felt lighter somehow, the weight that had been pressing on their chests finally starting to lift. By the time they pulled into the driveway, the sun was shining brighter, and for the first time in days, the house felt like a place of safety again. Over the next few weeks, life began to return to normal. Darren's arrest made headlines, and while the news was a constant reminder of the ordeal they had been through, it also marked the beginning of a new chapter. The twins went back to school, their confidence slowly returning, and Janice began to sleep through the night again, though she still checked the locks before bed, just to be sure. One evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, Malik spoke up. "Do you think it's really over?" he asked, his voice cautious but curious. Janice reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "I don't know," she admitted. "But what I do know is that we're stronger than we think. No matter what comes next, we'll face it together." Marcus nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah," he said. "We've got this." And for the first time in what felt like forever, they believed it. The shadows of fear and uncertainty that had loomed over them were fading, replaced by a newfound strength and a determination to move forward. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew they would face it as a family, standing together against whatever came their way.